us, drop a note, say hi in the chat, tell us where you're at. And second of all, if you're like me, you've screwed up a time or six in your life. And sometimes those have been big, sometimes those have been small, sometimes they've just been downright embarrassing. But the fact remains, we all have our moments where we just flub things up. But luckily, there's good news, and the good news is what we're going to focus on today with Dan. And Dan is the author of a brand new book called Redeemed: Our Lives as Sinners and Saints. And so we've already got somebody. This must be a relative, Dan. Sue Hoppen is watching from Omaha, Nebraska.
That's my mom.
Hey, I hope you have lots of questions, Sue. Hit us with some really good questions for your son. Um, so while you're joining us, feel free to share this video so that other people can join in the conversation. And we're going to jump right on into it. I'd also like to welcome back our co-host, Nora. Nora is back with us. You may remember her from her time this summer as our CPH summer intern, and she's back helping us out on a variety of projects. So we're glad to have her as well. But Dan, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. We actually I work at a church, King of Kings, in Omaha, Nebraska. We had an all-staff serve day yesterday, so it's just been a very fun, positive week here so far. And obviously, having the book out is pretty fantastic too. I guess I should probably mention that.
Just a minor thing that happened in the course of your week. So, Nora, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, so here's my opening question for you, and no pressure, but there may be a right answer. Are you a cat person or a dog person?
Oh, dog, no question.
Do you have a pet?
We do. We have a dog. He is a little bit over a year now, a golden retriever named Benny.
Oh,
Well, and actually, the last time I talked to you, Benny was in a cone of shame, wasn't he?
Yes, well, he didn't have to wear that for very
Okay.
long, but yeah, the last time we talked, Benny had he'd gotten fixed. And what's hilarious with him and the cone of shame is if you put the cone on, he will not move. He's just like dead. He won't get up. Like you can put food in front of him. Normally he'll do anything for food. He won't move. He just like goes limp. It's
Oh,
sad and hilarious at the same time.
oh my good. Goldens have such great personalities.
They
So,
really do.
well, and we've talked about this, but you compare us in the beginning of Redeemed to a puppy. Can you explain that?
Well, yeah, it was Benny that made me think about this, and this wasn't just him as a puppy, but it still happens all the time now. Like he'll be out in the yard or something, and we'll call him to come inside, and he'll just look at me or my wife and then just ignore us and keep chewing on a stick, or he'll go the other direction, or he'll go, mess with some other dogs that are across the fence or whatever. And in my mind, it's infuriating to me because it's like if the dog comes inside, not only will it make me happy and he won't suffer the negative consequences of me being upset with him, but I'll probably give him a treat. So like there's all these benefits that come from him obeying and following my rules for him, which are good, yet he continually chooses to do the very thing that he shouldn't do, which is disobey me and ignore me. And as I was talking to my wife and expressing my frustration with Benny one time, it like, I don't know why this hit me, but it just hit me like a brick. It was like, well, this is what I do with God all the time. God has laid out very specific directions and rules for us that if we obey these, our lives will be better. Not just because he says so, but because it it just will. Like the commandments are there not to imprison us, but to free us. And as I was thinking about that, it was just like, man, we rebel against God all the time for no reason. And that is kind of what made me think about this book in the same way that I still love Benny and we continue to keep him around and continue to treat him very well. God loves us exponentially more than that and just continues to forgive and continues to forgive. He is so amazing. And I don't even know how to respond to that type of love.
It's hard to fathom when you think about it, because when we look at ourselves, if we really honestly take a look at ourselves, and we mess up hourly and like by the minute, and it half the time and we like to ignore it often. I think if it's not a major thing, like if it's not a major, I use the word big crime, it's easy for us to kind of brush it under the rug, and think that, oh, it's not so bad, but really it's not so great.
Yeah, we're kings of comparison. We love to, even when we acknowledge that we've done something wrong, it's so easy to say, but I'm not like that guy. That
Mm-hmm.
guy's worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's so true what you said, Elizabeth, and that we're constantly sinning. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's not, and I think that's a big reason or a big reason why I was inspired to write this book, or kind of the inspiration behind it, and that I'm someone who feels very convicted about my sins. And when I sin, I feel this unworthiness to even be in God's presence, which of course is the exact opposite stance I should be taking. When I sin, I should be running to God and asking for his forgiveness and asking for uh, his wisdom and better ways to handle the situation in the future. But instead, I look at myself and I'm like, why would God still love me when I continue to just run away from him and do the exact things that he has specifically told me not to do? And so, what I loved about writing Redeemed is you get a chance to kind of go through the Bible and look at all these screw ups that people had, all these things that they did that should have separated them from God forever, but you get to see God's response to them, and he always gives a second chance. Always. He always gives a third chance. Like, he will always come back to you. He will never completely close you off, and that is so amazing.
It's phenomenal. I mean, there aren't words to describe what that it really truly means for us, because it's so powerful. Nora, why don't you jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I think we get in our own way all of the time, and we cause ourselves to stumble. One of the first examples that you talked about was Paul and Barnabas, and how they let their pride get in the way. How do you see us doing that today?
I mean, I think it happens all the time. Like, there are times where it can be as simple as I get in a fight with my wife and I recognize that she's right and I'm wrong, and I don't want to admit that. So the fight perpetuates and it goes on way longer than it ever needs to, just because in my head I don't want to humble myself. And I think um, I think this happens in the workplace. I think it happens in business. I think it happens between families. Pride is one of those things that's so hard to give up. Even humble people on the outside have pride on the inside. You want to think well of yourself. Um, and when someone wrongs you or someone offends you, you get that righteous indignation that, you know, I we I deserve to be respected. And I think that's kind of what happened with Paul and Barnabas, and in that they were separated over what was really kind of a minor issue in the grand scheme of things, but it ended up breaking up this pair of just awesome people who on their first missionary journey changed the world. And you look at that and you're just like, man, if those guys could have just given up their pride and compromised on this thing and come to an agreement, what could they have done moving forward? But I think the thing that's so cool about looking at that story specifically is, even though their relationship was fractured, God used each one of them to go separate ways and bless probably double the amounts of people, because they each went on their own missionary journeys with their own teams going forward. So God took a thing that looked absolutely terrible on the surface and turned it into a huge blessing for a lot of people.
And that's really cool how that happens. And I think it's instructive for us when we think about all the times where it seems like it's a really bad thing in the moment. And in the moment, it may be, but God works all things for his good. And as you described, Paul and Barnabas, after they separated, did some great things. So I think if we can get out of our own way sometimes and trust that God has his plan, even when it's hard for us,
Absolutely,
Like
no
that.
question about it.
What are some ways that we can learn? You use a lot of great examples from throughout the Bible about people that we've studied all throughout our years, and many of these people in the Bible, they've all screwed up. I mean, they're all sinners just like we are. What are some of the ways that we can learn from them?
I think the biggest thing is just acknowledging that you're going to screw up. So when you do screw up, don't beat yourself up too much and think that you're not worthy of coming back to God. Like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, that's something big for me. But when you look at so many of these people, especially the ones who went on to have great success after their screw ups, they're the ones that came back to God and repented and asked for forgiveness and said, look, I know I screwed up. What do I need to do to make this right? David, I think, is a tremendous example. He is an elite apologizer, and he had some serious things that he needed to apologize for. But he's somebody who always came back to God and asked for repentance. Moses is another great example. He's someone who had a very close relationship with God. I believe is the only human to ever see God face to face or speak to God face to face. So I think that's the biggest thing is just it's kind of what you just brought up, Nora, with pride. It's giving up your pride to yourself and giving that to God and saying, you know what, I was wrong, but I'm sorry. I admit that I'm wrong, and I want to like what can I do, God? And you don't. There's nothing you can do to make it up to God because He doesn't even ask that of you. But you can try and live your life in a way that honors Him even greater, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we find ourselves, and you talk about this in the book, that dual role of both sinner and saint. So what tips do you have for refocusing ourselves so that we end up more on that saint side?
I think honestly, like I know this is kind of the boilerplate answer, but just getting into the Word. I don't know about you guys, but I know that there are seasons in life, like when I was writing this book, I was in the Word a lot more than I am just in my everyday life because I had a specific reason to. Like there was something every single day that was going to bring me back to being in the Bible, or I wasn't going to get the book done on time, and you guys were going to be mad at me. And during that time, I was so like my spiritual life was so much better. I was more patient with the people around me. I feel like I was a better husband to my wife. I was a better brother. I was a better son to my parents. I was more patient. Like everything about my life was maybe not necessarily easier, but I think just my overall outlook was better because I was constantly thinking about the Bible and the promises that it has for me. And I know that those seasons where I really intentionally dive into the Word and have a specific reason to be in it every day, that's when I'm most in tune with God. And even if things in my life aren't going great on the surface, I still feel better and I feel more empowered and the Spirit feels more alive in me just because I'm making that conscious decision every day to come to God and try and learn from Him.
I will say, I'll jump in. I meant to ask this earlier, but if any of our viewers are brave enough to share in the comments a time where they have had a screw up, but they've then, in hindsight, seen God use that for good. If you're brave enough, share those in the comments, and we can rejoice in the way that God works through all of us. And not everything, we've talked about. Sometimes the sins are on the surface and they're right there. And other times it's more of, I'm trying to remember how you phrased this the last time we talked about it, but God doesn't want us to be lukewarm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we see this, especially when we're fighting against culture and people get into habits and routines. It's very easy to settle into a lukewarm approach to our faith and to our spiritual life. Tell us about the dangers of that and how we can be alert to it.
Well, yeah, I think lukewarm living is one of the most dangerous things I think about being a Christian, because I mean it's great that you are a Christian, you've accepted Christ, you're going to heaven, but you're not making a difference for the world because you're just kind of meandering through life, going day to day, but not really living out your faith. Like if someone asked one of your coworkers, "Oh, is Dan a Christian?" They'd be like, I don't know. I never thought about that." That's really bad. That's lukewarm living. And I think if you look in the Bible, the example that I used in the book was the rich young man who comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to get into heaven?" And Jesus asks him if he's obeyed the commandments. He says, "Yes, I have." And Jesus then says, "Okay, then sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and then follow me." And it just says the rich young man went away sad. And Jesus is angry in this moment. If you look at his response, he really gets after this guy a little bit, because he had the head knowledge to understand that Jesus was someone really special and Jesus could help him get into heaven. He got it, but he didn't care enough to give up the earthly thing that he cared about the most, which was his money and his possessions, to follow the thing that he should have been prioritizing, which was Jesus. And Jesus's response was just like, he said it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for the rich to get into heaven. And he's not specifically talking about rich people, that rich people can obviously go to heaven, but he's talking about just he's so mad at the lukewarm living, that someone would be exposed to his truths, understand his truths, see the benefit of his truths, and still just continue to live just whatever blah, white bread type of life. And it really frustrates him. And I think, it's easy to point at the rich young man and be like, well, what is that guy doing? Like he could have been like the leader of the disciples potentially. He was actually an educated guy, versus all the disciples are just a bunch of fishermen and tax collectors and, people that society didn't value. Where this rich young man, he had like actual cachet, he had power, he had influence, and he chose not to do it. But we do the same thing all the time. I don't volunteer as much as I should. I don't always respond in a way that that is most Christ forward, I think, in my interactions with people. And I'm sure it's very, very frustrating to God when we just get stuck in those ruts.
The Bible class that I'm in on Sunday mornings, we just started a new series on the book of Hebrews, and this is exactly what we were talking about on Sunday as we were getting started. And the writer of Hebrews warns Christians about drifting away and the dangers of that. And we need to remember that if we fall into this lukewarm kind of living, it's easy to let culture, if we're not paying attention to where things are moving us, we're going to be off our target. And when our target is Christ, we don't ever want to drift off target. And so it really is it's something that it's so easy to fall into, but the ramifications are huge.
Yeah, and the verse that I reference in the book is Revelations 3:15-16. It says, "I know your works. You are neither hot nor cold. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth." And that's pretty harsh from God there. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, hot is where we want to be. That's just Christians that are on fire. They're filled with the Spirit. They're out living Christ-led lives every single day. But even cold people, they still have the opportunity to get warm. Like maybe they haven't been exposed to Christ's truth yet, and they haven't accepted Him as their Savior. Maybe they have some roadblock that's going to change or something. But it's the lukewarm that are really frustrating, because they could be hot if they wanted to, and they've just made the choice not to. And I think that's where you get that tough language of "I will spit you out of my mouth," because that's when God gets the most frustrated, when someone gets it but refuses to do anything with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what you were talking about with pride and the example of your dog. You know, like we know what's supposed to be right, we know what we're supposed to do, but so often we make the choice to not do it because we're lazy or we don't want to, or, you know, fill in the blank with anything. And we just choose to live that lukewarm lifestyle instead.
So our friend and your fellow author, Deb Burma, just jumped in and said the dangers are real and thankful for God's gentle rebuke. May I not become lukewarm. So good words for all of us.
Definitely.
Nora, where to?
All right, so sometimes it feels like, I know for me at least, that I sin and I sin over and over and over again, and I feel like, you know, surely God's not going to forgive me this time. Or like, gosh, I did the same thing that I just told him I wasn't going to do. What encouraging words do you have for people who feel like their sin is too much or too frequent?
Well, thank goodness there's no such thing. You know, again, you can look at many different characters in the Bible, and we see they do the same things over and over again, and they fail. I mean, one of the most famous, you look at Jonah, and he did not want. God told him, "Okay, I want you to go to Nineveh, and you're going to tell them that I'm going to destroy them because they've been sinful." Jonah did not want to go to Nineveh because Nineveh was his enemy, and he was afraid that if he went, that they would repent, and then God would save them. So he was like, "Nope, not delivering that message. Not going to do it. I hate them, so I will not deliver this message." That hatred in his heart was his sin. And so, of course, we all know the story. He's eaten by the giant fish, gets spit up, goes to Nineveh, delivers God's message, then they repent. And Jonah is furious. Like, he's had this whole experience where he was in this fish for multiple days, and he supposedly learned his lesson, and he gives God this whole spiel about, "Oh, you know, I will be faithful to you now, and I will deliver your message to the Ninevites and everything." But at the end of it, he still has that hatred, and he's so mad at God because God spared the Ninevites. So, like, you see, just days apart, he repeats the same sin of hate, even after he has this harrowing, supposedly life-changing experience, and God still forgives him. God still provides shade for him. God still comforts him. And I think that's the thing that we have to come back to, is you can't out-sin God. You can't outrun God. Obviously, you know, he would prefer us not to sin, but there's no amount of sin, even if it's the same thing over and over again, God will never turn his back and say, "You know what? You lied for the 1 millionth of one time. That's it. I'm done with you." Christ's sacrifice took that out of the picture. We don't have to worry about that as long as we remain committed to him and believe in that truth that he died to save us. There is no amount of sin that can separate us from God, which is just the most beautiful truth there is.
Our friend Shelley just shared in the comments that it seems the more we try to serve God and study his word, the more we see our failures. Thank God for his never-ending love. So that's very true. And I think it's worth noting that for those of us that have been raised in the faith for our whole lives, we know, even we struggle with this. We know, as you said, Nora, that like we feel like we constantly repeat the same sin over and over, and we're struggling it. And we our head knowledge knows that God still loves us and that Christ died once for all and that we're forgiven, but we still wrestle with it. For those who may be new to the faith, I would imagine that this is a harder thing to wrestle with because it may not be as deep in the head knowledge. What would you say, Dan, for how we could encourage new Christians to rest in this promise?
Oh, I I'm sure it's different for everyone, but I feel like I commonly see it the opposite way, and
Okay.
where, especially if it's someone who has really lived a life of sin or what they perceive as sin, when they realize the promise that Christ has given us and this gift that they get to receive, they are on fire. I feel like they
That's a fair point. I should have thought about it. Yeah, keep going.
I just think that they appreciate it even more. Whereas someone like me who has grown up as a Christian my whole life, I know that, I've accepted Christ and I'm going to heaven. And like that is an amazing gift. But because I've always known about it and I've always had it, it doesn't have that novelty. And I think I definitely take that for granted. Whereas from what I've seen at least, and I'm sure that there are people who are more, along the lines of what you said, who have difficulty accepting that gift. But a lot of people, I feel like, when they realize this amazing forgiveness that they have, that all these things that they've done in their life that they feel so terrible about, and they feel like no one could love them, and then they realize that there is someone who matters more than any human who does love them, they are just like on fire. Which there's actually a story that I heard. We were serving at this place called the Open Door Mission yesterday from my church, and there was a guy who basically alcohol had ruined his life. Because he was an alcoholic, his marriage had failed. He no longer was in touch with his kids. He wasn't employed. Like basically, his life had fallen apart because alcohol had consumed it. And he was just sitting on a bench drinking. And somebody came up to him and asked, "Hey, can I pray for you?" And this guy was just like, no chance. And he just got up and walked away. But the first place he went to afterwards, and he didn't even know why, but he went to the Open Door Mission. And that guy now runs the culinary program at the Open Door Mission and is just like this incredible on fire dude who I can't even tell you how many staff members he touched in such a positive way yesterday, because he is so on fire now, because he thought he was garbage. He thought that his life had no meaning, that he had screwed up in such an irrevocable way, that his wife wasn't coming back, his kids weren't coming back, he had no value. And he found that the most important person or the most important being in the entire universe valued him more than anything. And that knowledge freed him to do amazing things now. So I guess I would just encourage any non-believer or new believer just to embrace that truth and just wrap your arms around it and just love it, because it is so amazing. And it's something that I need to remind myself of as well. And yeah, just thinking about it, I think you can tell I'm getting excited.
Yeah, just a little bit. No, and I think you're right, and I've seen the way you described it too. And I think for those of us that have been lifelong in the faith, we just need to remember our baptism and remember that God called us and that we've been made a member of His family and have had those waters wash over us. And if we can shift our focus to that, we can overcome any of that uncertainty and doubt. Nora, what you got?
So you already talked at the very beginning about what inspired you to write this book, but kind of building off of that, what is the biggest takeaway that you want somebody to get out of your book, or like the biggest message? If they get one thing, what is that one thing?
I think it would be just kind of what we talked about a few minutes ago, and that you're never too far gone. There's no such thing as Christ taking a pen and crossing your name off and saying, "Nope, not that one. Too sinful." I mean, we see it. The people that God or that the Bible lifts up, as these examples and pillars of our faith. The Moseses, the Josephs, the Davids. Basically, you pick a biblical character and they have these massive screw ups that it seems like they shouldn't be able to come back from. And yet God not only forgives them and redeems them, but he makes them an important part of his story, and he continues to empower them and use them to tell the story of Jesus' coming and his life and his resurrection. And I think if we just recognize the ways that God continued to embrace these people, I think maybe we can beat ourselves up a little bit less from that recognition, realize that we're not so bad, we're not alone in our sin, but we also see that God not only forgives us, but he will empower us and he will continue to use us in amazing ways if we allow him to.
That's a great note to end on. And as we do wrap up, for our viewers, you can learn more about Redeemed, Our Lives as Sinners and Saints, which is brand new this week, at cph.org/redeemed. The link is in the chat, so you can go there and click on that, and you can download a sample and learn more about the book. Dan, it's been so much fun to chat and to get to know you as we've worked together. This is your first book with CPH, and so it's been great fun. And congratulations to you on its release this week.
The pleasure has been all mine. You guys have been an absolute joy to work with. By the way, for everyone watching, it sent me flowers yesterday. How nice is that? Like, just such a nice little pick-me-up. I mean, I'm not a huge flower person, but it's just nice to see like a thank you, thinking of you gift. And my wife absolutely loves them. So thank you very much.
Well, we've enjoyed the partnership, and we're looking forward to seeing how Redeemed touches lives and helps tell the story to its readers. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks Nora, thanks Dan, and we'll see you all